Let's go. Good afternoon. It's great to be here under this marquee. We're going to talk today about monopolies and competition. It's a very strategic discussion. We could talk about the competition between the US and China for hours. The variety of stakeholders can be considered to be a weakness. There's issues around critical mass and technologies which are favourable to dominant companies and who can impose their standards. So should we accept or encourage monopolies in order to remain competitive? It's a difficult question because things that make a company stronger exteriorly could be negative for us in the domestic market and for the consumers. So we're going to look into that tension this afternoon. We're going to think about how we can bring together the issues of economic sovereignty and competition. We're going to talk about Europe, about doctrine, about concentration, and about levers of power. There's a lot of issues, and to talk about them, we have the CEO of the French Railways, SNCF, Jean Castex, and we also have the Chief Executive of TF1, Rodolphe Belmer. Gentlemen, you lead companies in highly strategic sectors for our country. They're highly regulated sectors as well, and we'll probably mention that. But my first question to both of you is, in some ways, a rhetorical question, but it will introduce the subject we're talking about to that. Monopoly or competition? Which is the most relevant model for the future, for your sector? Rodolphe Belmer. Thank you very much for this question. It's a bit of a theoretical question in some ways, but it does enable us to set a framework for the debate. In my industry, which is the media and audiovisual industry, we understand the benefits for the country because television and in particular the TF1 group, it's not the only company in the sector, provides high quality entertainment, information and other types of content to the whole country. And that's part of the way that our country learns to live together. It provides access to culture, news, information to the whole population and perhaps to some parts of the population that wouldn't normally have access to it. In our sector, it's not necessarily a choice between monopoly and competition. A choice has been made. It's the frying pan and the fire. It's monopoly and competition. I don't want to be too long, but what does it mean in our sector? In TV and media in France, and it's true throughout Europe, but particularly in France, is extremely competitive. It's competitive because the government has chosen, for various reasons, to have a number of stakeholders which compete together through the awarding of frequencies which can be used to send broadcast programs to the French people. So we're quite small, we're quite fragmented. And coming in, we have stakeholders which are coming in on our smartphones, on our TVs, Netflix, Disney, Amazon, which are huge players, 100 times bigger than us, and they're coming to compete with us on our television screens. They're competing for audience, they're competing for advertising revenue, which is the heart of things, and that's what funds the TV production. So our authorities have required high levels of fragmentation from domestic stakeholders, whilst allowing other stakeholders who are huge to come in with very little taxation, and there's massive vertical concentration in the case of Google, for example, and horizontal concentration for others. And that's perhaps the introduction I would give you. Jean Castex, would you say it's the frying pan and the fire for you in the same way? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, first of all. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It's not such a theoretical question in the railway sector. It's perhaps a bit less the case for urban transport, but in terms of large-scale rail transport, it's not necessarily obvious from an economic theory point of view what is the best model. Let's have a look at history. I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the railways. In France, and in most surrounding countries, the railway started under private ownership. Private companies got maybe a little bit of public support, but they built out all of the French railway network throughout the 19th century. The SNCF, which created as a monopoly, only started in 1937. Why do I say this? It's interesting. Some people say it was created by the Popular Front. It was a political choice to nationalise the railways and create a monopoly. It's not exactly that way that it works. It's quite interesting to think about it. The same private companies weren't able to continue to break even by operating the railways, and they actually begged the state to come in and nationalise the railways. After decades of monopoly, under the impulsion of the European Union, we have opened the industry up to competition. It's quite interesting to think through that history because it demonstrates that it's not an entirely neutral question. If we believe our Greek friends and think that history is an eternal re-beginning, we might have another swing of the pendulum. So what's happened since the start of the 2000s has been a bit more like what is going on in the aviation sector, a little bit like what's going on in telecoms, but a bit less similar to what's going on in media and TV. But to simplify, we have separated infrastructure management, the tracks, the overhead power lines, that is managed by monopoly companies, infrastructure management bodies, and it's the railway operation that's been opened up to competition. And today, everything is open to competition. People didn't always think this was true. We started with rail freight, that happened 20 years ago. That opened up 20 years ago, and now even passenger transport is open to competition. All passenger transport, in fact. There are two aspects. There's the high-speed train, which is freely organised, and it is considered that train companies, including the SNCF, need to fund this service themselves. So when you take a TGV train in France, there is no public subsidy. It's absolutely prohibited. So we pay for the infrastructure investment, the staff costs, the rolling stock, everything. And then alongside that, we have regulated transport. It's also open to competition. That's what it has in common with high-speed travel. But because it cannot break even from an economic point of view, there are some public subsidies, generally from the French regions or from the national government. So the situation shows some degree of contrast. There is competition, even though competition is coming in only gradually, but to date, the theoretical question has been settled. Now we're going to see what's going to happen in practice. Well, to take the question a bit further, as we said, both of you lead companies which are in a very specific market sector. You've talked about what's going on right now. What's the way? How do you read these competitive markets? Let's go a bit further, Jean Castex. Well, yes, I would say competition is here. It's not theoretical. It is happening. You can see it. I don't want to mention my competitors. You'll understand why, obviously, here. But they compete with us on the high-speed rail network and on the regional transport network. And in terms of regional transport, SNCF has lost some of the public procurement contracts and won others. The regions issue the calls for tenders and decide on which company they're going to work with. So what's the effect of the competition? Some of the old railway companies like ourselves, some of our competitors come from neighbouring countries like Italy and Spain. when we talk about competition for high-speed rail, there's competition not just on domestic rail routes, but on rail routes in neighbouring countries. SNCF has got a strong strategy as well. Those countries, train companies are coming to compete with us on our national companies, but we, with Eurostar, are working into the UK, Belgium. We want to work into Switzerland. We're trying to work in Italy as well. So we've got a real development strategy. And then there are other rail operators which are founded fairly spontaneously. They're not long historic train companies that are coming into the market, and the aim for all of us is to say, well, what's going on with all of that? What are the economic consequences? What are the consequences in terms of the public interest? I have called for a competition observatory to study what's working, what's not working so well, in order to correct the reforms and make sure that the effects are as positive as possible. Before handing the floor to Rodolphe Bellmer, is it fair to say that you are a little bit annoyed with what's going on with competition in your sector in the area? Yeah, well, I do have a message, a clear message that I want to say. When I was a young man, I studied competition economics. So I know there are a few prerequisites that are required. We need to have a level playing field, the same rules for everyone. That applies to the SNCF as much as anyone. But let me say things in very concrete terms. Today, for high-speed trains in France, there are very profitable routes and some routes that are much less profitable. Let's not talk about the line here in the southeast. That's very profitable. But if you look at the Atlantic route, if you have a train that goes from Paris to Bordeaux without any stops, that's profitable. But if you stop in the smaller, medium-sized towns, it's not so profitable. So I wouldn't say it's fair that competitors only serve the profitable parts, but it's not that we are forced to do it. We choose to do it because we're stopping in places like Angoulême, Libourne and places like that. I think the regulator needs to set a level playing field with the same rules for everyone about where you have to stop. And if you don't stop everywhere, then you should contribute to the balance of the system, because the money that we earn from high-speed trains, TGVs, is paid back into modernizing our infrastructure in order to adapt it to climate change. So the first issue, it doesn't seem like I'm annoyed about this. It seems just common sense. We need the same rules for everyone. I think it's a strong message. The Parliament needs to take hold of this, and I'm hoping that the draft bill that's before it will be voted through.
Same thing, Rodolphe. This, the way you look at the competitive markets today in your domain. Well, my conclusion, as you will see, my conclusion is exactly the same, probably. Or even though we are in different domains, fair enough, but we do want rules to be the same for everybody. And the state should deal with the foreign players as they deal with the French players. Yeah, today, you know, there is a transformation which is very deep, which is results from the evolution of the way French people use the media, and which is carried by you know, the low noise revolution that is television screens. You know, they have connected screens, be it internet boxes, or directly connected to the internet. We call them the smart TVs. So this provides interactivity and also consumption of programs on demand. So it's video on demand whenever I want, with whom I want, and quantity I want. It's very ergonomic, user-friendly, and it leads to a major change of usage. French people move away, viewers move away from the old mode television, the linear television, where you look at a program at 9 o'clock because the director of the program of TF1 said it would be 29 o'clock, and they go towards more flexible digital consumption. It's a problem for us because when the viewers drop, advertising drops, and therefore funding the cultural ecosystem, to finance the information drops as well. The resources drop as well. So what do we do to compensate for that? Well, we develop enough digital strategies. We now moved into digital. We have the first streaming platform, fully free, financed by advertising, to enter the digital use of French. We want to have our TF1 plus, distributed to all the screens in France to, take part of the digital advertising on TV screen, which on competition with linear television. So far, so good. Good strategy, good innovation, good execution. Problem is that we are collecting parts of market on linear advertising to whom? To the other players on the linear, and they're good, Semeta, it's YouTube. And so, the rules are not the same. The framing of the activity is completely different from that of YouTube or Meta. So therefore, I want, basically, YouTube pays nothing in France. They don't pay for the infrastructure, they don't, neutrality of the internet, and they don't pay program because they're just hosting. So they don't pre-finance programs, So what does it mean? That they have no cost as such, and they can sell their advertising very cheap. They sell advertising, €5 per 1,000 views, and because of the drop of costs, have to be €12 per 1,000. So it doesn't work. So the system in which we function now and the framework, and where you don't want to put the major actors who are vertical concentration and they're monumental, well, this is really damaging our sector, which is economically very important for our country, and socially it is key for our country as well. Now, to continue in that direction, so you both run groups which are transforming, and both you have requests from politicians and regulators. Sometimes it's a bit, it has to be acrobatic. Now, how do you deal with that? Rodolphe, continue on your dynamics. How do you deal with all those aspects coming from the top, actually? It's complicated. It's very complicated because what's need to be done, we know. We don't have much to do it. So the identification of the impediments and constraints or the have an impact on the visual economy, and there are several rules, laws. I'll spare you the details, but all this is quite obvious. So it so happens that today the public authorities, and we sorry about that, we say it more and more, it becomes problematic, which are sort of apathic. Why? Because the parliament is in a fragmentation condition, we know, so it's complicated to have legislative reforms in our countries. Well, part of the framing of the audiovisual framework comes from a law that dating to 1986. Okay, we know in 1986 there was no digital, there was no YouTube, you didn't have data and so on and so forth, and digital publicity, advertising, and then there is the regulation. No regulation either. So rules say that, but it is. I'm not allowed to have two advertising which are not 20 minutes apart. So on YouTube you got advertising whenever they want. We have rules in France say first how many advertising, what time, how I spread them. Everything is regulated. So there's a direction, and the state doesn't move and is like apathic because of the lack of majority. But it becomes an issue because while France is waiting for the presidential election, the world is moving, and it's an issue. Same thing for you, Jean Castex. Well, you talked early on about transformation, all these movements taking place. Of course, you're right. Everybody here knows the French railways. You're, a large company, national company. So we can all understand the shock that to open to competition, a group which was in a situation of monopoly for 90 years. You can see the sociology of the problem we face. Therefore, of course, we need to change some rules and so on and so forth. But we have the problem. The positive points. Well, first one is, well, opening to the competition. Okay. Well, it's like you have different shares of the cake, and it's easier when the cake is growing. We've never transported so many people in our trains. There is a clear demand for trains, and I can only happy about it, But since 2019, plus 20% people in TGV, plus 45% on TERs, on regional trains, Well, today the problem is not competition, it's the lack of trains. We don't have enough trains. Please deliver trains. I need rolling stock. So, but it's a good news. It's good news. Earlier on I talked about the European perspectives. Well, it will be better if we have an expanding market than a shrinking market. So, the second good news is that this competition, is boosting us. It's a motivation. I've been using the train for years, with amazing improvements have been done in the hospitality, the management of travelers. Of course, there are improvements to be made, but truly enough, to be competitive in that respect, yes, we have to be better. And what is at stake for me is to convince my teams that we should not be scared. We can do it. We have the resources, we have the know-how, we have the skills. But yes, it is complicated. It's an organization. And social dialogue is significant. Is this, you like my understatement? Okay. So we know how to do that. So we have to accept competition. We have to improve our productivity and our efficiency, but without breaking everything. Otherwise it's not going to work. I'm judged on the efficacy of my system. So we all face that problem. We have to find the right dose. Things go fast, accelerate. We have to go through social dialogue, through discussions, through clear-cut objectives, to have this transformation, as you say. And as you say, to do win-win, it's an amazing challenge. It's fascinating, trust me. 2 minutes to take two very short questions in the room. Please don't make comments, but do ask a question. No microphone, no translation. I can have a content on TF1 or whatever. When I take a train and I go to Annecy, it becomes complicated with competition. It's complicated as a train user. So my first question, so the client experience, and there is room for improvement. Now, Netflix is American with a player which is French. What about the European giants who could, we could be competitive against Netflix? So clients, well, one word about the European plan, one word, French groups have to increase their size and should have more size effect to invest in contents. The essential expansion will not take place at the European level. It will take place on linguistic basis. What TF1 wants to be, it will be the major player in the French-speaking world. There is a cultural community, and this cultural community will pay attention to our programs, and we'll be able to amortize them to have virtual circles. I will let Mr. Castex answer. Well, the client experience challenge is essential, yeah, but opening to the competition, I know no system which is either all good or all bad, all have their advantages and limitations. this is where we need public authorities. We need to have the agility or to correct rapidly what doesn't work. Opening to the competition, client experience, it will push price down. But it will also, I said it, improve the management, attention paid to clients. Yet, today, as it is done, well, but, there are many organization authority. Each one will invent its own system for distribution, The user is getting lost. There are change of load, and, before it was the French railway, it was advantage in terms of correspondence and so on. You need one desk for booking. So Europe is aware of that. It just come up with a project to unify all this, to oblige every player through interoperability, for better connectivity to solve this issue. So it's, well, this is life, on a everyday basis. But anyway, the client experience, well, it has to improve. Even if we stay a monopoly, we must make sure that the company should be here to improve the client experience. That's it. Thank you.
Pour votre éclairage.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.